See, that's where most guys screw it up. My brother Wyatt shoved 2 salt shakers across the sticky table and tapped a Ketchup's bottle with one thick finger. The Apache comes in from the east, banks hard right, drops suppression fire, then circles back across the ridge. The 3 contractors sitting across from him nodded, like they were getting a master class from a 4-star general, instead of a guy who had spent exactly 2 years in the National Guard and never heard a shot fired outside a training range. One of them even pulled out his phone and opened a notes app. I sat at the far end of booth number 4, wearing my usual gray sweater, peeling the paper label off a bottle of water one strip at a time. The VFW hall smelled like stale domestic beer, fried onions, and the kind of discount cologne that came in oversized bottles during holiday sales. A country song played somewhere near the bar. Somebody dropped a pool cue. A waitress carrying 6 baskets of wings squeezed through the crowd without spilling a single one. Nobody paid attention to me. That was normal. Wyatt loved an audience. I loved silence. Then my team moved in, Wyatt continued. His team. Right. I watched him push the salt shakers across the table again. The maneuver he was describing wasn't just exaggerated. It was physically impossible. The aircraft loadout he mentioned wouldn't allow the banking angle he claimed. The fuel consumption numbers didn't make sense either. But nobody at the table knew that, and I wasn't about to explain it. My father, Harrison Hayes, sat beside him with the proud expression of a man watching his son cure cancer. Every few minutes he glanced around the room to make sure people were listening. Most of them weren't. That never stopped him. "That's my boy," he said, grinning. Wyatt took a long drink of beer and continued talking. The contractors listened politely. The bartender wiped down the counter. A television over the bar replayed highlights from a college football game. Life went on. Meanwhile, I slowly rolled the peeled bottle label into a tiny paper tube. Small project. Kept my hands busy. Across the table, Wyatt was now explaining battlefield communications. Wrong again. Very wrong. Dangerously wrong. One contractor named Rick frowned. "So how many deployments was that?" Wyatt didn't even blink. "Enough." The answer hung there. Conveniently vague. My father laughed. The contractors laughed. Wyatt smiled. I took a sip of water. Nobody asked for proof. That was the funny thing about confidence. People often mistake it for competence, especially when it's loud. A waitress stopped by and placed another beer in front of my father. The receipt clipped to the tray, $8.73. He tipped exactly $1, as always. The waitress thanked him anyway, as always. My mother Barbara sat beside me, quietly stirring ice cubes in her soda. She wasn't a bad person. That was the complicated part. She just spent 30 years smoothing over problems instead of solving them. Whenever Wyatt bragged, she smiled. Whenever Dad insulted someone, she changed the subject. Whenever I got pushed aside, she asked me to be understanding. Peace at any cost, including someone else's. Mostly mine. Wyatt slapped the table. That's when everybody started looking at me. Of course they did. In his version of events, crowds always gathered, people always applauded, women always flirted, mayors always asked for advice. Reality was apparently optional. The contractors exchanged quick looks. I could tell at least one of them wasn't buying the story anymore. Then the oldest contractor turned toward me. His name tag said Curtis Plumbing. Nice guy. Probably mid-50s. He gave me a friendly smile. "What about you, Morgan?" I looked up. "What about me? You work over at the base, right?" I nodded. "Something like that. Does your admin job ever get exciting?" The question wasn't rude, just uninformed. Most people assumed I handled schedules, paperwork, or personnel files. That was intentional. I had spent years mastering vague answers. The less people knew, the better. I opened my mouth. I already knew exactly what I was going to say. A simple response. Polite, forgettable, safe. Well, every day is a little differ. A beer glass slammed against the wooden table. Hard, the crack echoed through the booth. Conversations nearby paused. The contractors looked over. Even the waitress stopped walking for half a second. My father leaned forward. His jaw tightened. His eyes stayed fixed on me. Not angry, not exactly. More annoyed that somebody had interrupted Wyatt's performance. Barbara immediately touched his arm. "Now, Harrison." But he wasn't listening, and I already knew what was coming, because I'd heard versions of it my entire life. Right before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. Have you ever sat quietly while someone less capable took credit for being the smartest person in the room simply because they were louder than you? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about dignity, family conflict, and the moment truth finally catches up with arrogance. Remember, our new stories premiere every day at 12:30 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. Make us part of your daily routine. Across the table, my father's fingers tightened around the beer glass, while the entire booth waited for him to speak. The sharp crack of glass against wood left a brief pocket of silence around our booth. My father kept one hand wrapped around his beer while staring at me like I had committed some social crime by existing in the conversation. Barbara squeezed his forearm. "Now, Harrison, let her speak." Her voice was soft. It always was. "You don't survive 35 years of marriage to Harrison Hayes by raising your voice." Dad ignored her completely. The contractors shifted in their seats. Wyatt leaned back with that familiar grin he wore whenever somebody else became the target. I recognized that grin. I'd seen it since middle school. Back then, it usually appeared right before I got blamed for something he did. Some traditions never die. Curtis, the contractor who had asked me the question, looked uncomfortable. I was just making conversation. Dad pointed toward him with the neck of his beer bottle. "Don't take this the wrong way." That phrase usually guaranteed the wrong thing was coming. "Morgan doesn't really know much about military life." The contractor blinked. Neither did I, at least according to my father. Dad took a drink, set the bottle down, then kept going. "She works on base, sure, but it's office stuff." The contractors exchanged another look. I stayed quiet. "Paperwork." Dad shrugged. "Schedules, reports, whatever they have people doing behind desks these days." Wyatt chuckled. I peeled another tiny strip from my water bottle label. Dad wasn't finished. "People hear somebody works around the military and automatically think they're involved in all kinds of exciting things." A few people from nearby tables had started listening, not because they cared, because loud conversations are free entertainment. Dad nodded toward Wyatt. "Now him, here we go. He understands real service." Of course he did. In Dad's mind, Wyatt had personally won every war America ever fought. The fact that Wyatt's military experience consisted mostly of weekend drills and paperwork of his own never seemed to enter the discussion. Funny how paperwork only counted when I did it. Wyatt raised his beer slightly, a humble hero accepting praise. "At least in his imagination," Dad continued. "Military life teaches things you can't learn sitting behind a computer." The irony almost made me laugh. Almost. Instead, I took a sip of water cold. Quiet, safe. One contractor cleared his throat. I figured anybody working on base would probably see some interesting things. Dad waved his hand dismissively. "Not the kind of things that matter." Barbara's eyes closed briefly. That tiny expression told me she knew he was being unfair. She just wasn't going to stop him. Because stopping him would create conflict. And conflict was the one thing she feared more than injustice. The jukebox switched songs. Someone near the bar cheered at a football replay. A waitress carried a tray loaded with burgers past our table. Life kept moving. My father kept digging. "You know what the problem is today?" Nobody answered. That had never stopped him before. "Everybody wants credit." He pointed toward Wyatt. "Guys like him earn it." Then he pointed toward me. "People like Morgan think wearing a badge gets them the same respect." I looked at him. Just looked. No anger, no surprise. This wasn't new. The contractors looked embarrassed now. The kind of embarrassment people feel when they accidentally witness a family argument in public and suddenly become unwilling participants. Curtis tried one last time. "I didn't mean anything by it." Dad nodded. "I know." Then he leaned forward. His voice got louder. Not shouting. Worse. The confident voice of a man who believed he was speaking obvious truth. "Don't bother asking Morgan about military service." The neighboring table had completely stopped talking. Everyone could hear him now. "Pushing paper and fetching coffee doesn't teach you anything about the real world." Nobody laughed, not even Wyatt. For half a second, the entire booth sat frozen. The smell of beer, the hum of neon signs, the scrape of a chair somewhere behind us. Every little sound seemed sharper. I looked directly at my father. He looked back, certain, comfortable, proud of himself. I opened my mouth. "Dad, I just..." His hand sliced through the air. A quick, dismissive motion. The same gesture he'd used since I was 12. Conversation over. Opinion rejected. Case closed. "Let your brother finish, Morgan." His voice carried across 3 tables. Then came the sentence, the one everybody would remember later. The one he probably wished he could take back. Only real soldiers speak. Nobody moved. Nobody smiled. Nobody knew what to do with that. Wyatt finally broke the silence by lifting his beer and taking a long drink. Smug. Comfortable. Protected. The contractors stared down at their boots. Curtis looked like he wanted to disappear. Barbara looked at her glass, Dad looked satisfied, and I sat there for another few seconds. Not because I was hurt. Not because I was shocked. Honestly, neither one required much effort anymore. What I felt was something simpler, clarity. The kind that arrives when somebody finally says the quiet part out loud. For years, my father had treated my work like a joke. For years, Wyatt had enjoyed the benefits. For years, Barbara had asked me to be patient. And now every person in that booth had heard exactly what the family hierarchy looked like. No confusion. No guessing. No pretending. Just honesty. I glanced at my watch. 7:32 p.m. I had a briefing packet waiting on my kitchen counter. An encrypted call scheduled later that night. A life that would continue moving whether anybody at this table respected it or not. I reached into my wallet, pulled out a 20, placed it on the table. The water I ordered had cost $2.79. The rest was for the waitress. She deserved it. I stood. Nobody stopped me. Dad had already turned back toward Wyatt. The show was continuing. The star had regained the spotlight. Perfect. I slipped on my jacket, turned toward the exit, walked past the pool tables, past the dartboards, past the wall covered in faded photographs of actual veterans who never spent their evenings inventing stories about themselves. Then I pushed through the heavy metal doors. The country music vanished instantly. The rain hit my windshield in steady waves as I crossed the parking lot, and by the time I slid behind the steering wheel, the entire conversation was already being filed away into the same mental compartment where I stored everything else that wasn't allowed to interfere with my job. I started the engine and waited for the windshield wipers to clear a path through the rain. By the time I pulled out of the VFW parking lot, my father's voice was already gone, not forgotten, stored. There's a difference. People think emotional control means you stop feeling things. It doesn't. It means knowing where to put them. I had learned that lesson years ago. The road home was nearly empty. A delivery truck passed me near the county line. A gas station sign flashed $3.81 a gallon. Somewhere behind me, the VFW crowd was probably still listening to Wyatt explain battles he had never fought. I didn't think about it. I had work. Real work. The kind that didn't care about family drama. The kind that didn't stop because somebody's feelings were hurt. When I got home, I changed clothes, reviewed a briefing packet secured inside a locked case, ate half a turkey sandwich standing at my kitchen counter, and tried to get 90 minutes of sleep. I managed 63. Good enough. At 1:22 a.m., I was back in my car heading north. The rain had mostly stopped. The roads were dark. The world fell asleep. Mine wasn't. Fort Belvoir came into view shortly before 2 in the morning. The installation never looked particularly impressive from the outside. Just fences, lights, concrete. People imagine secret government facilities looking like movie sets. Most don't. Most look boring on purpose. Boring attracts less attention. I reached the first checkpoint and presented credentials. The guard checked the screen, looked at me, looked back at the screen, then waved me through. Routine. The second checkpoint required fingerprint verification. The third required retinal confirmation. By 2:14 a.m., I was standing outside a secure compartmented information facility that officially didn't exist for most people. The SIF door unlocked with a heavy mechanical click. I stepped inside. The temperature was exactly 64 degrees. Cold enough to keep the equipment happy. Cold enough that newcomers usually complained within 10 minutes. The room smelled like ozone, electronics, and coffee that should have been thrown away 6 hours earlier. Normal. A row of analysts sat in near silence. Nobody talked about family, nobody talked about politics. Nobody cared who won arguments at dinner tables. Only information mattered here. I logged into my workstation. Multiple authentication screens appeared. Credentials, tokens, verification, approval. Finally, the secure network loaded. Satellite feeds filled 3 monitors. Maps filled a 4th. A high-value target was moving through Kunar province, slowly, carefully. Surrounded by terrain that could turn deadly with one mistake. I slipped on my headset. Haze online. A voice responded immediately. Copy. No greetings, no small talk, no wasted words. The mission briefing began. For the next several hours, my world shrank to data, coordinates, movement patterns, signal intercepts, thermal imagery, probability assessments. Everything reduced to information, clean, objective, reliable, unlike people. At 3:47 a.m., a thermal signature appeared near a ridgeline. Potential threat. At 4:03 a.m., another source confirmed activity. At 4:19 a.m., encrypted communication suggested an ambush site was being established. Piece by piece, the picture formed. One analyst tracked movement. Another monitored signals. Someone else managed logistics. I handled operational integration. Nobody cared about titles. Results mattered. A 6-man extraction team was scheduled to move through the area before sunrise. Good men, experienced, the kind who trusted information they couldn't personally verify. That trust carried weight. Because if we got something wrong, they paid the price, not us. I watched green indicators move across the map, slowly, methodically. A coffee cup appeared beside my keyboard. I didn't even see who left it. That happens sometimes. People looked after each other here without making speeches about it. The coffee tasted terrible. I drank it anyway. At 6:12 a.m., additional thermal signatures appeared exactly where our probability models predicted. Confirmation. The threat was real. The extraction route was compromised. Several analysts began cross-checking data simultaneously. No panic, no drama, just work. The target package needed to move. The team needed a new route. The clock kept ticking. By 7:01 a.m., we had enough information to make the call. I reviewed the final assessment, checked every source, verified every feed, then checked everything again. Live sat on the other side of that decision. Finally, I pressed the transmit key. Organize alternate corridor, execute route echo. One sentence, nothing dramatic, no music, no applause, just a transmission moving through encrypted channels. Hundreds of miles away, 6 soldiers adjusted course. That was it. The mission continued. Hours later, I watched 6 green dots safely clear the danger zone. Every one of them still moving, every one of them alive. The room didn't celebrate. Nobody high-fived, nobody gave speeches. An analyst updated a report. Someone refilled coffee. A supervisor requested documentation. Mission accomplished. Next problem. That's how real work usually looks. Quiet, professional, invisible. I leaned back for the first time in nearly 11 hours. My eyes burned, my shoulders hurt. The coffee had stopped helping around sunrise. As on another screen, after action summaries were already being generated. The machine never stopped. Neither did we. Somewhere back home, my father probably believed I spent my days organizing paperwork and bringing coffee to people with actual responsibilities. The thought almost made me smile. Almost. At 1:28 p.m., I completed my final reports. At 1:41 p.m., I transferred authority to the next operational team. At 1:52 p.m., I logged out. The screens disappeared one by one. The maps vanished. The feeds ended. The mission became another classified file buried inside a system most Americans would never know existed. I stood up, collected my badge, walked toward the exit. Then the heavy steel door closed behind me with a long pneumatic hiss. 3 weeks later, that same sharp hiss seemed to echo again, except this time it wasn't a secure facility sealing shut. It was the sound of a microphone feeding back inside the crowded ballroom of the Riverside Civic Center. The sharp squeal from the microphone faded into scattered applause as another local official finished introducing himself for the 3rd time that evening. Somehow, every speaker at the Riverside Civic Center managed to sound exactly the same. Different names, different titles, same speech. I stood near the back exit, holding a club soda and wondering how many taxpayer-funded banquets one town actually needed every year. Apparently, the answer was one more. The annual Heroes of Riverside Gala occupied the entire ballroom. Rounded tables covered with white linens stretched across the room. A temporary stage stood beneath oversized American flags. Servers moved between guests carrying trays loaded with steak, salmon, and desserts nobody needed after eating a full dinner. The event brochure listed 23 sponsors. Wyatt's company occupied the largest logo on the back page, naturally, front and center. Exactly where he liked to be. 3 weeks had passed since the VFW incident. Nothing had changed, at least not publicly. My father still called Wyatt every other day. Barbara still texted family updates. And nobody mentioned what happened at the bar. Families have a funny way of pretending uncomfortable moments never happened, especially when admitting the truth would require accountability. Across the ballroom, Wyatt worked the room like a man campaigning for governor. His tuxedo looked expensive. It also looked one size too small. Every time he buttoned the jacket, the fabric strained like it was filing a formal complaint. He didn't seem to notice, or care. He was too busy shaking hands. Council members, business owners, county administrators. Anybody with a title received Wyatt's full attention. I watched him corner a city commissioner near the dessert table. Within 30 seconds, he was talking about municipal security contracts again. The man probably regretted making eye contact. My father loved every second of it. Harrison moved through the crowd, proudly introducing his son. That's Wyatt Hayes. Handshake, smile, pause. Runs Sentinel Ridge Security. Another handshake, another smile. Best tactical security company in the county. A third handshake. Then his favorite line, the tip of the spear. Every time. Without fail. I heard it at least 7 times. Possibly more. After the 6th one, I started mentally keeping score. Small entertainment. Needed something. Barbara eventually found me near the exit. She adjusted the sleeve of my dark blue dress. Not because anything was wrong with it. Because she needed something to fuss over. Morgan, you should mingle. I'm fine right here. You always stand by yourself. I looked around the room. The people networking weren't actually talking. They were exchanging future favors. Different activity, same appearance. I'm okay. Barbara sighed, the sigh of a woman disappointed by behavior she fully expected. You could at least try. There it was. The family motto, keep trying, keep smiling, keep pretending, make everyone comfortable. Especially the people creating the discomfort. I took a sip of club soda. The ice had mostly melted. I came, didn't I? Barbara hesitated. Fair point. Attending had been her idea. Actually, idea was generous. She had called 3 separate times, then sent 2 texts, then showed up at my house with a printed invitation. Apparently, my presence was necessary to maintain the illusion of a healthy family. Mission accomplished. I was physically present. The illusion remained intact, mostly. Barbara glanced toward Wyatt. Your brother's doing well, of course. We had entered familiar territory. I could practically recite the conversation from memory. That's good. He works hard. I'm sure he does. He really cares. About this town. Another sip of soda, another pause. Then she added the part she always added. You should be proud of him. I almost laughed, not because she was wrong. Because she never seemed to realize pride wasn't the problem. I was proud of plenty of people. The issue was that pride somehow only traveled in one direction inside our family. Before I could answer, applause broke out near the front tables. Wyatt had apparently secured another audience. Wonderful. The room slowly gravitated toward the stage area. Servers removed dinner plates. Guests found their seats. The evening's keynote presentation was approaching. That detail had attracted more attention than the food, or the awards, or the sponsors. For once, the featured speaker wasn't a state senator or retired athlete. This year, somebody important was coming. At least important enough to make local politicians nervous. I checked the event program again. Deputy Director Samuel Vance, Defense Intelligence Agency, Washington, D.C. That alone explained the unusually visible security presence. Several plainclothes federal agents had been positioned around the ballroom for over an hour. Most guests never noticed. I did. Occupational habit. One stood near the service entrance. Another monitored the main hallway. A third remained beside the stage. Professional. Alert. Unobtrusive. The exact opposite of Wyatt, the room buzzed with speculation. People wondered whether federal grants were coming, infrastructure money, security initiatives, economic development programs. Everybody wanted something. That's what happened whenever Washington sent a representative. Hope multiplied instantly. The ballroom doors near the side entrance opened. Conversations slowed, then stopped. Several heads turned simultaneously. Even from across the room, I could immediately identify Samuel Vance. Not because he looked powerful, because he didn't. No military decorations. No dramatic entrance, no expensive-looking entourage. Just a balding man in a simple gray suit carrying a thin portfolio. He looked more like a tired accountant than one of the most influential intelligence officials in the country, which was probably why he was effective. The truly dangerous people rarely announced themselves. A hush settled over the room. Then chaos hit one specific section. Wyatt, of course. I watched him spring out of his chair so quickly he nearly knocked it backward. His napkin hit the floor. One shoe caught a table leg. For a brief second, I genuinely thought he might fall. Instead, he recovered and hurried toward the entrance wearing the biggest smile I'd seen all night. My father followed immediately behind him. Proud. Hopeful. Ready to witness another glorious Wyatt Hayes moment. Across the ballroom, the deputy director of the Defense Intelligence Agency had just stepped through the doors. And my brother was practically racing to be the first person to shake his hand. I watched Wyatt accelerate across the ballroom like he'd just spotted the last helicopter leaving a combat zone. The man was moving fast. Too fast. Several guests had barely stood up before he was already halfway to the entrance. His tuxedo jacket pulled tight across shoulders as he walked. His smile looked rehearsed. His hand was already extended long before he reached his target. Confidence wasn't Wyatt's problem. Timing usually was. Deputy Director Samuel Vance stepped fully into the ballroom. The room immediately adjusted around him, not because he demanded attention, because real authority doesn't need to. He wasn't tall, he wasn't physically imposing. He wasn't surrounded by dramatic security formations. A gray suit, plain black shoes, simple tie. Thin portfolio tucked under one arm. He looked exactly like the kind of man people would ignore in an airport, which made him dangerous. The people who need everyone to know they're important usually aren't. Wyatt reached him first. Of course. Director Vance. His voice carried farther than necessary. Several heads turned. The federal agents noticed him immediately. I could almost hear them mentally preparing paperwork. Wyatt thrust out his hand. Wyatt Hayes, Sentinel Ridge Security. Vance slowed slightly, not stopped, just slowed. My company handles tactical security operations throughout Riverside County. The handshake remained hanging in midair. Waiting, expecting, demanding. Wyatt kept talking. Always great meeting another brother in arms. There it was, the phrase, his favorite one. The contractors at the VFW had heard it. City officials heard it. Potential clients heard it. Apparently, senior intelligence officials got the same treatment. I spent time serving myself. Vance looked briefly at the extended hand, then at Wyatt. His expression didn't change. No irritation, no curiosity, nothing. Just polite acknowledgement. The way somebody might acknowledge a parking meter. Then he spoke. 2 words. Excuse me. Not rude, not warm, not interested, just final. Vance continued walking. The handshake remained untouched. For a second, Wyatt looked genuinely confused. His arm stayed suspended in the air longer than necessary. The moment stretched. A few nearby guests suddenly found the ceiling very interesting. Others examined their drinks. Nobody wanted to witness the awkwardness directly, but everyone noticed. Wyatt slowly lowered his hand. A flush crept up his neck. Not enough to embarrass him, yet. Behind him, my father immediately shifted into rescue mode. That was another family tradition. Whenever Wyatt stumbled, Dad appeared like an emergency response team. Harrison stepped forward with a smile, confident, professional, certain he could fix the situation. Director Vance. The older man extended his own hand. My name's Harrison Hayes. This time Vance paused briefly. Not for the introduction, for basic courtesy, good evening. Dad smiled wider, former Sheriff Harrison Hayes, a title he somehow managed to mention in almost every conversation despite retiring nearly a decade earlier. He didn't disappoint. I served as sheriff here for 22 years. There it was, right on schedule. Vance nodded once, polite, waiting. Dad continued. My son runs one of the most respected security firms in the county, of course. Always back to Wyatt. We'd love a chance to speak with you. Another smile, another attempt, another opening. Vance listened, then glanced beyond both men, nodded them, past them, toward the back of the room, toward me. The change was subtle. But I saw it, so did the federal agents. Something shifted. His attention locked onto a point near the rear exit. Wyatt noticed, Dad noticed, neither understood. Vance stepped around them, not through them, not aggressively, simply around them. Like water moving around 2 rocks in a stream. The conversation ended before it began. Wyatt turned, Dad turned, half the ballroom turned. Now everyone was watching. The deputy director of the Defense Intelligence Agency continued across the room. One measured step after another. The crowd slowly parted. Guests moved aside instinctively. Nobody knew why, but people recognize purpose when they see it. The ballroom grew quieter, chatter faded. Even the servers carrying trays slowed down. I remained where I'd been standing for most of the evening. Near the back exit, club soda in hand, dark blue dress. Nothing remarkable, nothing attention-grabbing. Exactly how I preferred it. As Vance approached, I considered several possibilities. None of them involved public recognition. Nobody from my world did public recognition. That wasn't how the job worked. Information moved quietly, people moved quietly, success moved quietly. The entire system depended on it. 20 feet, 15, 10. Conversation stopped completely now. The silence spread outward across the ballroom. 5, 4, 3. Vance stopped exactly 2 feet in front of me. The room froze. I could practically hear people trying to solve the equation. Deputy Director, Federal Security. Morgan, why? Good question. Vance set his portfolio under one arm, straightened slightly, then snapped his heels together, not dramatically, professionally, deliberately. The movement was precise enough that I instantly recognized its meaning. Respect, not social politeness, not networking, not politics. Respect. Then he gave a slow nod, the kind exchanged between people who understand exactly what the other person carries. No smile, no performance, no speech, just acknowledgement. Years of classified work had taught me to control my expression. Useful skill, especially right now. Because across the ballroom, my father's face looked like someone had handed him a math problem, written in another language. Wyatt wasn't doing much better. The confusion was almost impressive. The guests nearest them had already started whispering, questions, guesses, speculation. Nobody had answers, yet. Vance finally spoke. His voice remained calm, quiet, controlled. Good evening, Captain Hayes. The club soda suddenly became the most interesting drink in America. Because if there was one thing the room knew for certain, it was this. Nobody there had ever heard anyone call me captain before. The silence hit the ballroom so completely that I could hear ice shifting inside somebody's glass across the room. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody seemed quite sure what they had just witnessed. Deputy Director Samuel Vance had crossed an entire ballroom full of politicians, donors, business owners, veterans, and local officials to acknowledge the woman standing alone by the exit. The woman everyone assumed did paperwork. The woman my father barely let speak. The woman my brother usually introduced as my sister who works somewhere on base. Not anymore. Vance's greeting had changed the atmosphere instantly. Questions were spreading through the crowd faster than gossip ever could. I saw people leaning toward each other, whispering, guessing, trying to connect pieces they didn't have. Meanwhile, Wyatt stood frozen near the entrance. His expression reminded me of someone discovering halfway through a test that he had been studying the wrong subject all semester. Confused, concerned, and rapidly losing confidence. My father wasn't doing much better. He remained standing beside one of the front tables, staring directly at me. Not angry, not embarrassed, not yet, mostly confused. His brain was trying to reconcile two completely incompatible realities. Reality number 1, Morgan handled paperwork. Reality number 2, a senior intelligence official had just addressed Morgan as Captain Hayes. Only one of those realities could survive. The collision was already underway. Vance gave me one final nod, then turned toward the stage. The federal agents immediately resumed moving, subtle, professional, almost invisible. The event coordinator hurried toward the podium. The master of ceremonies looked relieved that somebody important had finally arrived. People slowly returned to their seats, slowly being the important word. Nobody wanted to miss whatever happened next. Neither did I. I remained near the back, exactly where I preferred to be. The less attention, the better. Normally. Tonight wasn't normal anymore. Vance climbed the small set of stairs leading to the stage. The microphone squealed briefly. The same sound that had opened the evening. Except now the room reacted differently. Every eye followed him. Every conversation stopped. Every question waited. The master of ceremonies launched into another introduction. Federal service, leadership, national security, public partnerships, the usual language. Vance thanked him politely, then stepped forward. No dramatic smile, no politician's wave, no attempt to charm the audience, just business. The man placed a thick manila folder onto the podium. The sound alone caught my attention, heavy, solid, official. I recognized it immediately. Department of Defense, red, tamper, evidence seal, classification review markings. Someone had gone through substantial effort to prepare that package. Interesting. Very interesting. The audience noticed it too. People always notice official-looking things, especially when they involve government seals. The folder sat under the stage lights. Plain, ordinary, terrifying, depending on your perspective. Vance adjusted the microphone. The ballroom settled into complete silence again. Then he began speaking. I was invited here tonight to discuss local heroes. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Some people command attention by increasing volume. Others command it because everyone instinctively knows they should listen. Vance belonged to the second category, he continued. Communities need role models. A few heads nodded. Reasonable statement. Safe statement. Then he shifted direction. But I've spent most of my career learning something unusual about heroism. The room leaned forward, even Wyatt. Real heroism rarely announces itself. Nobody moved. Real heroism rarely seeks recognition. The room grew quieter, if that was even possible. And real heroism almost never brags. The sentence landed directly in the front row, specifically one seat, Wyatt's. I saw several people glance toward him. The timing wasn't subtle, neither was the message. Vance continued without changing expression. Most importantly, true heroism is often classified. There it was, the shift. The moment everybody realized this speech wasn't heading where they expected, a county commissioner stopped writing notes. One local reporter lowered her phone. Even the waitstaff seemed frozen. Then Vance placed both hands on the manila folder. The room watched. Nobody blinked. Nobody coughed. Nobody checked their phone. Slowly, deliberately, he broke the red tamper seal. "RIP." The tearing sound echoed through the ballroom. 400 people heard it. The noise wasn't especially loud, but in complete silence, it felt enormous. The seal separated. The folder opened. And suddenly, every person in that room knew something significant was about to happen. My father shifted in his seat. I noticed because Harrison Hayes never shifted. He usually occupied space like he owned it. Not tonight. Tonight, uncertainty had finally arrived. Wyatt swallowed. The confidence that carried him through the entire evening was starting to leak away a little at a time. Vance reached inside the folder, removed a single document, then another, several pages, most heavily redacted. Entire sections covered in thick black markings, lines, blocks, paragraphs erased from public view. Classified information leaves a distinctive fingerprint even when hidden. The audience didn't understand what they were looking at, but they understood enough. These weren't ceremonial certificates. These weren't fundraising announcements. This wasn't grant money. This was something else. Something real. Vance organized the pages carefully, then lifted his eyes from the podium. The movement seemed small. It wasn't. Because he wasn't looking at the audience. He wasn't looking at the mayor. He wasn't looking at the sponsors. He wasn't looking at me. His gaze settled directly on two men sitting near the front. My father, my brother, Harrison and Wyatt Hayes. The room followed his line of sight. Hundreds of eyes turned with him, and for the first time all evening, neither of them looked remotely comfortable. Vance's expression remained calm, controlled, professional. But there was no warmth in it, no friendliness, no invitation, only facts waiting to be spoken. He held the redacted document in one hand, looked straight at the men who had spent years deciding who counted as a real soldier, and his eyes were as flat and unforgiving as polished steel. The room stayed silent. Not polite event silent, not waiting for the speaker silent. This was the kind of silence that happens when people sense they're about to witness something they were never supposed to see. Director Vance looked down at the document, then he began reading, not dramatically, not theatrically, just clearly. Like a man presenting facts that no longer required permission. Portions of this citation remain classified. His voice carried effortlessly across the ballroom. Certain operational details have been removed. Names, locations, and mission identifiers remain protected. Nobody moved, nobody interrupted. Even Wyatt had stopped trying to look important. Vance continued, "This citation concerns actions conducted during a 72-hour operational period in eastern Afghanistan." Several veterans in the audience immediately straightened in their seats. Military language has a certain rhythm. People who have served recognize it instantly. This wasn't ceremony language. This was documentation, the real thing. Vance turned a page. During a rapidly evolving combat situation, multiple U.S. Army and Special Operations elements became isolated across separate sectors after hostile activity disrupted planned movement corridors. The ballroom remained frozen. My father stared at the stage. I could almost see him trying to understand where this was heading. He wasn't there yet. But he was getting closer. Communication interruptions, degraded visibility conditions, and conflicting battlefield reports created a high probability of catastrophic friendly force losses. Nobody whispered anymore. Nobody checked their phones. Every eye remained fixed on the stage. Vance glanced down again, then continued. A single intelligence officer was assigned responsibility for integrating overlapping surveillance assets, signal intercepts, thermal imagery, and real-time battlefield communications. I felt several people glance toward me. Just briefly. The pieces were beginning to move. Not enough yet, but enough. Vance read another section. The officer maintained operational awareness continuously for 72 hours with limited rest, while managing simultaneous information streams from multiple classified sources. I remembered those 72 hours, not emotionally, practically. 3 different coffee mugs, a headache that lasted 2 days, a chair that needed replacement, the strange numbness that comes from staring at screens too long, the things people never imagine when they hear the word hero. Vance continued. During the operation, 3 separate platoons became trapped by enemy activity while attempting movement through terrain later identified as containing active explosive hazards. A veteran near the front lowered his head slightly. He knew exactly what that meant. Minefields. Nobody needed the word explained. The room seemed smaller now, tighter. He turned another page. Using satellite surveillance, thermal analysis, route prediction modeling, and encrypted communications, the officer identified a viable extraction corridor. I remembered that moment too. Not because it felt dramatic, because it felt heavy. Decisions always do when other people carry the consequences. Vance paused briefly, then delivered the next section. The officer transmitted revised routing instructions that prevented multiple friendly units from entering a confirmed kill zone. Nobody breathed. Nobody shifted. The room had become completely absorbed. Then came the number, the one detail that remained unclassified. The successful execution of those instructions directly contributed to the survival and safe extraction of 41 United States military personnel. A few people actually gasped, quietly, but audibly. 41, not 1, not 2, 41. The number landed differently than every sentence before it, because numbers don't argue, numbers don't exaggerate, numbers don't care about opinions. 41 men came home, or they didn't, simple. Across the ballroom, I watched Wyatt slowly sit down. Nobody told him to, nobody asked him to. His legs just seemed to stop cooperating. My father looked worse, much worse. The confidence he'd carried his entire life had begun slipping away, not because somebody insulted him, because facts were arriving, and facts don't negotiate. Vance continued reading several more approved excerpts, recognition from Joint Command elements, operational commendations, references to leadership under pressure, mentions of extraordinary judgment. Most of it sounded clinical. Military writing usually does. No poetry, no speeches, no emotional language, just outcomes. Results, evidence, the truth documented by people whose job depended on accuracy. Finally, Vance reached the final page. The room remained motionless. He lowered the document, closed the folder. The sound echoed softly through the ballroom. Then he looked up. Not at the mayor, not at the audience, at me. The silence somehow deepened. I stood exactly where I'd been standing all evening, club soda still in my hand. The ice had completely melted. Nobody seemed to care anymore. Vance's eyes remained on mine. Then he spoke. Captain Morgan Hayes. The words rolled across the ballroom, no microphone adjustment, no dramatic pause, just certainty. The entire audience turned toward me. 400 people, one movement, like a wave. Vance continued. You are the reason those men are alive today. Nobody looked away, not even Wyatt. Not even my father. The United States government thanks you for your silence. His voice remained calm, steady, professional. But tonight, we recognize your voice. The room didn't react immediately. For a brief second, everybody simply sat there, trying to process what they had just learned, trying to reconcile the quiet woman near the exit with the story they had just heard, trying to understand how someone could save 41 lives without ever mentioning it. Then reality finally arrived. Hard, my father's face lost all color, every bit of it. He gripped the edge of the table so tightly that his knuckles turned white, not metaphorically, actually white. The former sheriff who always had answers suddenly had none. The man who spent years measuring military value through stories, its forms, noise, and ego now sat directly in front of evidence he couldn't dismiss. Wyatt looked even worse. For the first time in my life, I saw my brother physically retreat from attention. He actually took a step backward. Then another. The room noticed, everyone noticed. The contractors from the VFW were there too. I recognized them immediately. Curtis, Rick, the others. Their expressions said everything. Embarrassment, shock. Around the ballroom, whispers started spreading. Not loud, not cruel, just unavoidable. People were connecting memories, conversations, comments, jokes, assumptions, all of it. Every person in that room now understood the same thing. The woman they ignored. The daughter they dismissed, the sister they talked over, the one who supposedly pushed paper and fetched coffee, had helped bring 41 American soldiers home alive. And the men who spent years deciding who counted as a real soldier were sitting in the front row while the entire town learned exactly how wrong they had been. The applause started near the middle of the ballroom. One person, then 3, then 10, then everyone. Within seconds, 400 people were on their feet. The sound rolled across the room like a wave. Chairs scraped backward, hands came together, people stood, veterans stood, business owners stood, city officials stood. The same audience that had spent years seeing me as background scenery was suddenly looking directly at me. I didn't smile, I didn't wave, I didn't place a hand over my heart. I simply met Director Vance's eyes and gave him a short professional nod. Nothing more. He returned it. The exchange lasted less than 2 seconds. It was enough. The applause continued. Louder now, longer. People wanted a moment, a celebration, a scene. Human beings love visible endings. Real life rarely provides them. I remained exactly where I was. Club soda still in my hand, the glass now warm from sitting untouched all evening. Across the room, I noticed several veterans nodding toward me. A few placed hands over their hearts. Others simply watched. No speeches, no performance. Just understanding. Those reactions meant more than applause ever could. Director Vance stepped away from the podium. The event organizers looked completely lost. Their carefully planned gala had just been replaced by something real. No script survives contact with reality, especially not one written by a committee. The crowd slowly began talking again. Questions, comments, shock. Every conversation in the room centered on the same subject. Not Wyatt, not the sponsors, not the grants. Me. For the first time in my life, that felt uncomfortable. Because attention had never been the goal. The mission was always the goal. The work was the goal. The people coming home alive were the goal. Everything else was noise. Then I saw my father stand, slowly, unsteadily. The man who once carried himself like the most confident person in every room now looked 20 years older. He pushed away from the table. Nobody stopped him. Nobody spoke to him. The crowd parted automatically as he crossed the ballroom. I watched him approach. His shoulders looked smaller, his steps looked uncertain. For the first time I could remember, Harrison Hayes didn't seem to know what to say. Good. Neither did I. A few feet behind him, Barbara followed. Her eyes were red. Not from crying from realization, there is a difference. Further back stood Wyatt. Or at least a version of Wyatt I had never seen before. Quiet. Motionless. No jokes, no stories, no audience, just silence. The 3 of them stopped in front of me. Nobody spoke immediately. The applause had finally faded. The room remained attentive, not because people were nosy. Because everyone understood something important was happening. My father opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Morgan? His voice cracked. That surprised me more than anything else. Harrison Hayes didn't crack. Not after funerals, not after retirements. Not after losing elections. Yet here we were. He swallowed, looked down briefly, then back at me. Morgan! The sentence collapsed. He tried again. We didn't know. There it was. The defense. The explanation. The thing people always say when consequences finally arrive. We didn't know. His hand lifted slightly. Not commanding. Not dismissive. Just uncertain. We didn't know, he repeated. Why didn't you tell us? The question hung between us. Simple. Reasonable. And completely wrong. Because the problem had never been information. The problem had been respect. I looked at my father. Really looked at him. The former sheriff. The proud father. The man who could spend an hour bragging about his son and 5 seconds dismissing his daughter. He wasn't evil. That would have been easier. He was something more common. A man who spent so long believing his own assumptions that he stopped questioning them. A man who confused volume with value. A man who kept rewarding confidence while overlooking competence. The world is full of people like that. Barbara stood silently beside him. Wyatt avoided eye contact. Interesting. For years I had been expected to look down while everyone else spoke. Now he was the one studying the floor. Funny how quickly roles can reverse. My father reached toward my sleeve, not aggressively, almost desperately. Like someone trying to hold on to a relationship that had already slipped through his fingers. His hand touched the fabric near my elbow. Lightly, carefully, I looked down at it. Then back at him. The room waited, not for drama, for truth. And finally, after years of swallowing comments, ignoring insults, and choosing silence over arguments, I gave him an honest answer. Not angry, not emotional, just honest. Because real soldiers don't need an audience to know what they're worth, Dad. The words landed softly, which somehow made them hit harder. My father's face collapsed. Not dramatically. quietly, the way certainty collapses when reality arrives. I gently removed his hand from my sleeve. No hostility, no punishment, no revenge, just finality. Some lessons don't require shouting. I picked up my purse, nodded once toward my mother, once toward Wyatt, then turned away. Nobody stopped me. Not this time. I crossed the ballroom, past the tables, past the giant flags, past the people who suddenly wanted to know my story. The heavy glass doors opened. Cool night air greeted me immediately. Clean, quiet, free. The noise from the ballroom faded behind me. The parking lot stretched out under the lights. For the first time all evening, nobody expected anything from me. No explanations, no patience, no understanding, no sacrifice. I reached my car, unlocked the door, slid into the driver's seat. The engine started on the first try, reliable, simple, honest. Inside the ballroom, my family remained behind, not trapped by me, not punished by me, trapped by something much harder to escape. The truth. The same truth they had ignored for years. The same truth 400 people now understood. Value doesn't come from who talks the loudest. Respect isn't earned through bragging, and real service doesn't need applause. As I pulled out of the parking lot, the Riverside Civic Center disappeared into the rearview mirror. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't driving away from something. I was driving toward a life that belonged entirely to me, and I was finally free. As I drove away from the Riverside Civic Center that night, I expected to feel victorious. A lot of people assume that's how stories like this end. The bully gets exposed, the truth comes out, the crowd applauds, justice wins, roll credits, but real life doesn't work that way. The road ahead of me was dark. The traffic was light. My phone buzzed 3 times before I even reached the highway exit. I didn't look at it. I already knew who it was: my father, my mother, maybe Wyatt, maybe all 3. For the first time in years, I wasn't interested in hearing what they had to say. Not because I hated them, because I finally understood something. The most painful part of my story was never what happened at the VFW. It wasn't hearing my father say, "Only real soldiers speak." It wasn't being interrupted. It wasn't being dismissed. It wasn't even being publicly humiliated. The thing that hurt most was realizing that the people closest to me had never really wanted to know who I was. Think about that for a second. There is a huge difference between being misunderstood and being ignored. A stranger doesn't know you. That's normal. A family member has every opportunity to know you. That's different. For years, my father never asked what I actually did. Not once. He asked about my schedule. He asked whether I was eating enough. He asked if my car needed maintenance. But he never asked about the work. Not because I couldn't tell him everything. I couldn't. A lot of it was classified. But there were still things I could have shared. General things, broad things, normal things. He never cared enough to ask. Because in his mind, he had already decided who I was. And once someone decides who you are, they stop paying attention to who you're becoming. That lesson changed my life. For a long time, I thought the solution was achievement. I thought if I worked harder, eventually people would notice. If I accomplished enough, eventually people would respect me. If I proved myself often enough, eventually people would change their minds. I was wrong. Some people don't change their opinion when they see evidence. Some people simply look for ways to protect the opinion they already have. Maybe you've met someone like that. A boss, a parent, a spouse, a friend. No matter what you accomplish, they move the goalposts. No matter what you do, it isn't enough. No matter how much you grow, they continue talking to the version of you that existed 10 years ago. Those people are exhausting. And eventually, you have to stop trying to convince them. One of the biggest mistakes I see people make is spending years chasing validation from the wrong audience. They work harder. They sacrifice more. They become successful. But deep down, they're still trying to impress somebody who made up their mind long ago. That's not ambition. That's emotional debt. And emotional debt can quietly control your entire life. I learned that the hard way. There was a period when I genuinely believed my father would finally respect me if he knew the truth. Maybe you've had a similar thought. If they only knew. If they could just see what I do. If they understood everything I've been carrying. The problem is that respect built on surprise isn't real respect. If somebody only values you after discovering your title, your salary, your achievements, or your thesis, they don't actually value you. They value the information. There's a difference. The standing ovation wasn't what changed me. The classified file wasn't what changed me. Director Vance wasn't what changed me. What changed me was finally accepting that my worth had never been dependent on their approval. Not my father's, not my brother's, not anybody's. And once I accepted that, something unexpected happened. The anger started disappearing, not overnight, not magically, but gradually, because anger often survives on hope. Hope that someone will finally understand. Hope that someone will finally apologize. Hope that someone will finally become the person you need them to be. When that hope disappears, a strange kind of peace can take its place. You stop fighting battles that cannot be won. You stop auditioning for acceptance. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. And that's incredibly freeing. If you're watching this and you've spent years trying to earn respect from someone who refuses to give it, I want you to hear this. Your value is not determined by their ability to recognize it. Your character is not defined by their opinion. Your future is not limited by their imagination. Some people will never understand who you are. Some people will never appreciate what you've done. Some people will never admit they were wrong. That's unfortunate. But it doesn't have to become your prison. The night everyone finally learned the truth about me wasn't the night I became valuable. I was valuable long before that ballroom stood up and applauded. The difference is that I finally understood it myself. And once you truly understand your own worth, you stop begging other people to confirm it. The more I thought about everything that happened that night, the more I realized my father and my brother weren't actually the same person. They made different choices. They had different personalities. They viewed the world differently. But they shared one weakness. And honestly, it's a weakness a lot of people never overcome. They both needed an audience. My father needed people to admire his family. My brother needed people to admire him. The details were different. The addiction was the same. Validation. Most people hear that word and immediately think of social media, likes, followers, comments. But validation is much bigger than that. Validation is the need to constantly hear that you're important. It's the need to constantly prove yourself. It's the need to constantly collect approval from other people because you haven't learned how to generate self-respect internally. And the scary part is that validation can look like confidence from a distance. My brother looked confident, very confident. He could walk into any room and start talking. He could tell stories. He could shake hands. He could introduce himself to complete strangers without hesitation. Most people would look at that and think, that guy has high self-esteem. Maybe, maybe not. Because truly confident people don't spend all day trying to convince everyone else they're important. People who know their value rarely feel the need to announce it. That's something I learned during my years working in intelligence. The most capable people I ever met were often the least interested in attention. One of the best operators I ever worked with drove a 12-year-old pickup truck with 186,000 miles on it. Another lived in a small townhouse and spent weekends coaching youth baseball. One analyst helped coordinate operations that saved dozens of lives and never mentioned it outside secure facilities. You would never recognize these people in a grocery store. You would walk right past them. And that's the point. Real competence is often quiet. Not always, but often. Meanwhile, I've met people who couldn't stop talking about themselves. Every conversation somehow came back to their achievements. Every story somehow made them the hero. Every room somehow became their stage. The problem with living that way is that eventually your happiness becomes dependent on external approval. And external approval is one of the least reliable things on earth. Think about how dangerous that is. If your confidence depends on praise, what happens when the praise stops? If your self-worth depends on recognition, what happens when nobody notices? If your identity depends on applause, what happens when the room goes quiet? That's where people get into trouble. I've seen it happen in careers. I've seen it happen in relationships. I've seen it happen in families. People spend years building an image instead of building themselves. Then one day the image cracks, and suddenly they have no idea who they are anymore. My brother wasn't the villain of my story. That's important. He made mistakes. A lot of them. But underneath all the bragging, I think he was chasing something many people chase. Significance. He wanted to matter. He wanted people to see him. He wanted respect. The problem was that he went looking for those things in other people's reactions instead of his own character. And that's a trap, because the crowd will always ask for more. More success, more status, more accomplishments, more proof. The crowd is never satisfied. You can spend your entire life feeding that hunger and still feel empty. That's why one of the most important lessons I can share with you is this. Don't confuse being known with being valuable. Those are not the same thing. A person can be famous and worthless. A person can be unknown and extraordinary. History is full of examples. Every community has examples. Every family probably has examples. The loudest person in the room is not automatically the most important. The most visible person is not automatically the most capable. The most celebrated person is not automatically the most admirable. And yet people forget this every day. They judge based on presentation, not substance, volume, not character, image, not reality. That's exactly what happened in my family. My father saw confidence and assumed competence. He saw storytelling and assumed experience. He saw attention and assumed achievement. And because he made those assumptions, he completely overlooked what was standing right in front of him. The lesson here isn't just about my father. It's about all of us. We all make assumptions. We all judge too quickly sometimes. We all risk overlooking people whose strengths don't come with a spotlight attached. So here's my advice. The next time you meet someone quiet, don't assume they're weak. The next time someone avoids talking about their accomplishments, don't assume they don't have any. The next time someone isn't demanding attention, don't assume they haven't earned respect. And most importantly, stop measuring your own worth through other people's reactions. Build skills. Build character. Build integrity. Build a life you can respect when nobody is watching. Because the strongest kind of confidence isn't the confidence that walks into a room and announces itself. It's the confidence that remains intact even when nobody applauds. And once you learn that difference, you stop chasing validation. You start building something far more valuable. You start building yourself. The morning after the gala, I woke up to 23 missed calls. Not 20, not 25, 23. My phone looked like it had survived a small emergency. There were voicemails, text messages, emails, 2 messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, 1 invitation to speak at a veterans event, 3 interview requests, and of course, several messages from family. I listened to none of them, at least not right away. Instead, I made coffee, fed my dog, sat on my back porch, and enjoyed something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Quiet, real quiet. Not the kind that comes from an empty room, the kind that comes from an hardened mind. That surprised me. Because if you had asked me a year earlier what would finally make me happy, I probably would have described something very different. I might have said I wanted recognition, respect, acknowledgement, justice, maybe even an apology. But sitting there that morning, I realized none of those things were actually responsible for the peace I felt. The standing ovation wasn't. The speech wasn't. The classified citation wasn't. The applause didn't change my life. The truth is, the biggest change happened long before that ballroom ever stood up. The real change happened when I stopped needing my family to understand me. That sounds simple. It isn't. For many people, it's one of the hardest lessons they'll ever learn. Because a surprising number of adults are still living emotionally as children. Not immature children, not irresponsible children. Just children who are still waiting. Waiting for a parent to finally say, "I'm proud of you." Waiting for a sibling to finally respect them. Waiting for an old teacher, boss, spouse, or friend to recognize their worth. Waiting for validation. Waiting for permission. Waiting for approval. And while they're waiting, life keeps moving. Years pass. Opportunities disappear, relationships change, entire chapters of life come and go, yet they're still standing there emotionally, holding out a report card nobody is ever going to sign. I understand that feeling. I lived it. For years, part of me wanted my father to see me. Not the version he imagined, the real me. The woman I actually became. The woman who carried responsibility he couldn't imagine. The woman who made decisions that affected lives. The woman who built a meaningful career without ever talking about it. I wanted him to see that person. And for a long time, I thought healing depended on him finally seeing it. I was wrong. Healing began when I accepted that he might never see it. That's a very important distinction. Because freedom begins where dependence ends. Not financial dependence. Not physical dependence. Emotional dependence. The moment your self-worth depends entirely on another person's opinion, you've handed them power they never should have had. And many people do this without realizing it. They let criticism define them. They let rejection define them. They let approval define them. They let other people's limitations become their own. That's a dangerous way to live. Because people change, opinions change, relationships change, crowds change. If your identity is built on external approval, your foundation is constantly moving. You can never truly feel secure. That's why I believe emotional freedom is one of the most valuable things a person can develop. Emotional freedom doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you become cold. It doesn't mean relationships stop mattering. It simply means you stop outsourcing your value to other people. You know who you are, you know what you've done, you know what principles guide your life. And you refuse to let somebody else's misunderstanding erase those things. The other lesson I learned is about forgiveness. A lot of people misunderstand forgiveness. They think forgiveness means pretending nothing happened. It doesn't. They think forgiveness means trust automatically returns. It doesn't. And they think forgiveness means forgetting. Definitely not. Forgiveness is much simpler. It's deciding that your future deserves more attention than your past. That's all. It's refusing to carry somebody else's mistakes longer than necessary. It's choosing peace over resentment. Not because they earned it, because you deserve it. I don't know what happened afterward for every member of my family. Life continued. As it always does. People learned, people struggled, people changed, some more than others. But that's their story, not mine. My story ended the moment I stopped allowing other people's opinions to determine my value. And if there's one lesson I hope you take away from everything you've heard, it's this. Your dignity does not come from a title. Your worth does not come from applause. Your value is not determined by the people who underestimated you. You don't need a standing ovation to matter. You don't need recognition to be significant. And you don't need anyone's permission to live a meaningful life. Know who you are. Build character, do good work, treat people well. Let your actions speak for themselves. And when the world inevitably misunderstands you from time to time, remember something my father learned too late. The loudest voice in the room is rarely the strongest one. Thank you for spending this time with me and staying through this entire story. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own journey, or if it helped you see your own value a little more clearly, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. We share new stories every day that explore family, resilience, dignity, and the lessons that shape our lives. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, share it with them. Until next time, take care of yourself, trust your own worth, and keep moving forward.